They fired me last Friday. No warning. No exit interview. Just a security guard handing me a box and the words, "You know why." I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing still real. My daughter's crayon drawing was taped to the dashboard. Daddy, my hero. She had no idea heroes could be erased this easily. That night, while staring at the ceiling, I remembered the spreadsheet, the one with the wrong numbers and the right intentions. Did I just burn my life to protect a truth no one wants? Or is this where something bigger begins? 12 years in this company. 12 years of spotless records, promotions earned, and weekends sacrificed. They used to call me the numbers guy, the man who could find a decimal out of place like a bloodhound. I wore that label like a badge. It meant I was dependable. It meant I mattered. When they asked me to lead the audit team for the largest merger in the company's history, $1.2 billion, I didn't hesitate. It was the kind of assignment you dream of once in a lifetime, the kind that makes or breaks your legacy. I told my wife over cold takeout and a pile of spreadsheets. She smiled, tired but proud, and said, "Just promise me this time you'll be home for Lily's recital." I didn't promise. I just nodded and buried my eyes in numbers. 2 weeks in, I started noticing inconsistencies. Transfers labeled consulting fees that were way above standard. Payment cycles that didn't match the merger timeline. One file showed a $42 million expense routed through a shell entity that didn't exist in our previous audits. I flagged it in red, emailed the legal department, and waited. No reply. The next day, the file was updated, and the red flag was gone. That night, I sat alone in the living room while Lily slept upstairs. Her drawing still hung crooked on the fridge. A stick figure family holding hands under a rainbow. I imagined her little hands sketching that while I combed through bank statements in silence. When my wife passed by in her robe, she paused and said, "You're disappearing again, even when you're here." I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. I brought it up the next morning during a strategy sync. Just casually. Just enough to gauge the temperature. My manager, Craig, always immaculately dressed, always too smooth, gave me a pat on the back and said, "That's why we trust you, Ethan. You see everything. Just don't get lost in the weeds, yeah?" He laughed. Others did too. I didn't. 3 days later, Amelia, a senior analyst and someone I had mentored, pulled me aside near the elevator. Her voice was quiet, like she was asking for a cigarette during a funeral. "Ethan," she said, "this thing, it's bigger than a few mislabels. I know you're the straight arrow type, but some things, if you poke too hard, they poke back harder." She looked pale. I asked her what she meant. She didn't answer. The elevator doors opened, and she disappeared into the crowd. What would you do if you discovered a truth no one wanted to hear? I escalated. I wrote a formal memo, included attachments, audit trail logs, screenshots, sent it to Craig directly. The next day, he invited me to lunch at a restaurant I couldn't afford. Ordered steak for both of us before I sat down. "Look," he said, "we know you're thorough. That's why we chose you. But there's context here. Strategy. Timing. You don't want to be the guy who tanks a deal over accounting semantics." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "We're not asking you to lie. Just understand the bigger picture." I didn't agree. I didn't argue. I just left the restaurant before the steak arrived. That night, I tried to log into the system. Access denied. It said it was a server issue. Legal said they were updating permissions. I knew what it meant. I wasn't part of the team anymore, not in any way that mattered. When I got home, the lights were dim. My wife sat on the edge of the bed, holding a manila envelope. "I'm not saying I'm done," she whispered, "but I can't live like this. I don't know who you're fighting, and I don't know why. But you're scaring me." She didn't sign the papers inside, but the message was clear. We were running out of next chances. I opened an old file I had saved from years ago, one of Craig's early reports when he was still climbing the ladder. Buried in the metadata, I found a familiar pattern: misreported vendor expenses, moved funds, creative accounting. He had done this before, and someone had protected him. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my daughter's room while she dreamed. I stared at her ceiling of glow-in-the-dark stars and whispered, "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing anymore." She stirred, mumbled something about a unicorn, and went back to sleep. Have you ever stood so firmly on what's right that the ground underneath you vanished? I wasn't just losing a job. I was unraveling the version of me I'd built my life around. The dependable man, the protector, the provider. All I had left was the truth, and I had to decide if it was enough. They called me into conference room 7C, the one with the frosted glass that never quite closed all the way. When I walked in, Craig was already there. HR sat across from him, stone-faced, and a corporate attorney I'd never seen before adjusted his tie like he'd done this 1,000 times. No small talk, no coffee, just a printout waiting for my signature. "Ethan," Craig began, not looking me in the eye, "after reviewing your recent actions and access history, we have concerns about improper handling of sensitive financial information." My heart didn't race. It just stopped moving altogether. "You're being terminated for misconduct," the lawyer said. "Specifically, unauthorized access and use of internal data in a manner that compromises company systems." I asked if I could speak. They said I could ask questions, but the decision was final. Craig slid a black folder across the table. Inside, a severance package contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement. The words blurred in front of me. I stood. I didn't sign. A security guard was waiting by the elevator. As we walked out, I noticed something strange. Silence. No one met my eyes. No whispered gossip. Just silence that pressed into my back like a weight. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Notifications. Dozens of them. LinkedIn removals. Group chats gone. Even people I had mentored unfollowed me. A digital exorcism. Hours later, I found out why. A screenshot had surfaced in a private Slack channel, a clipped chat where I questioned a payment line item. The part where I suggested internal fraud was conveniently highlighted. My name was trending internally as traitor in the house. The irony. I hadn't leaked anything, but someone wanted it to look like I had. I sat on the edge of the guest room bed, now my bed, watching my wedding video play on mute. We looked so young, so convinced that truth would always be enough. I didn't cry, but my voice cracked when I said her name out loud. When you lose everything, what exactly are you still holding on to? I deleted my social media accounts that night. No grand exit. Just gone. Ghost mode. I spent the next 2 days combing through every piece of data I had ever downloaded, saved, or archived. Redundancy had always been a virtue of mine. Now it was my salvation. I found a local backup on a thumb drive buried in a file cabinet. In it, An older version of the audit before the edits, metadata intact. I transferred everything to an encrypted drive. The next morning, I got an email from an address with no name. I was where you are. They buried me too. You're not crazy. Attached was a document. It listed 7 names. Former employees, all left under vague terms, all connected to sensitive projects. 2 of them had reached out to the SEC. Neither case went anywhere. I started to feel the shape of the thing I was up against. It wasn't a few bad actors. It was a system. A silent, practiced routine designed to erase those who didn't comply. Then the real gut punch landed. My encrypted drive started glitching. Files vanished. Logs showed remote access. I traced the IP. It matched a device previously assigned to our legal team. They had hacked me. Or rather, used the backdoor in our company-synced email. An account I hadn't remembered to disconnect. But they missed something. When my father passed years ago, I inherited his old cabin near Lake Michigan. He was paranoid about data breaches and never trusted the cloud. In the attic, buried beneath tax records and cassette tapes, I found it. An external drive, dusty but intact. On it, not just the original audit, every update, timestamp, message thread, and off-the-record internal note from the last 6 months. I held the drive like it was a relic, not just evidence, but the story of everything I had lost and everything I was still willing to fight for. That night, I called my mother. She asked how I was holding up. I told her the truth for once. I'm tired, I said. I feel like I'm breaking in ways I can't name. I thought I was stronger. She was quiet, then said, "Strength isn't not breaking, Ethan. It's choosing who you become after." We stayed on the phone longer than usual. Can you stand alone when everyone you once trusted now looks the other way? I went to bed that night with a hard drive in the drawer beside me and the weight of invisible eyes pressing down through the ceiling. The first journalist I contacted was a Pulitzer nominee who once brought down a pharmaceutical empire. Her voice on the phone was brisk, clinical. I've seen enough whistleblower cases crash and burn to know when something lacks legal teeth, she said. Without authenticated sources or cross-confirmation, this won't go anywhere. She wasn't unkind. Just finished. I thanked her and hung up. For the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely hollow. Not angry, not righteous, just deflated. I had evidence. I had motive. I had nothing. I wandered the web, aimless, searching for something, anything that might echo back my situation. That's when I found it. A forum so deep into the dark web, it felt like whispering into a cave. Simple interface, no usernames, just threads. One was titled, "When Truth Costs More Than Silence." I clicked. Inside were files, charts, anomalies, a message pinned. Oblivion has seen what you've seen. You're not alone. I created an account, no real name, just redacted witness. I posted a sanitized version of the payment flow I'd uncovered. Within hours, a reply came. "Meet me on thread 61. I have something you missed." I followed. There it was, an annotated map of internal transactions dating back 5 years, color-coded by risk category. Payments to shell companies I'd never even spotted. Routing paths that used offshore holding firms. Notes in the margins. Craig approved. Legal sanitized. Compliance silent. The poster, Oblivion. I messaged them directly. I asked who they were. They answered in code at first, but I pieced it together. He used to be one of ours. A security specialist, fired 3 years ago after violating privacy policy. But that was just the story. In reality, he'd flagged a similar discrepancy. They buried him, Same playbook. He never stopped watching. I asked what he wanted. His answer? I don't want revenge. I want a reckoning. I sat at my desk that night with the hard drive beside me and thought about everything I could do. Crash the system. Leak it all. Burn the house down. But no. That's what they'd expect. That's how they'd frame me. Angry, disgruntled, out for blood. Instead, I would go slow, careful. By the book, but better. I pulled out an old notebook and began outlining a plan. I wouldn't just expose them. I'd make it impossible for them to spin it. Later, I found an old picture of Lily in that same notebook. She was 8, missing her front teeth, holding up a handmade sign that said, "My dad is smarter than bad guys." I traced the letters with my thumb. Wrote one line beneath it. Let's prove her right. The next step was controlled release. I created an account on an international finance forum used by auditors, economists, and analysts. Under an alias, I uploaded a report. Not the whole story, just a segment, numbered, with metadata intact. A taste of the rot beneath the gold-plated walls. It didn't take long. Within 24 hours, 2 analysts from Hong Kong and 1 from Zurich started dissecting it. They noticed irregularities, asked questions, cross-referenced with public filings. I watched, silent, as a small digital fire began to spread. Then the markets opened. 4 hours in, the company's stock dropped 6%. No one had confirmed anything. But the questions had been asked, and the questions were loud. News outlets began speculating. Words like undisclosed liabilities and possible regulatory oversight failure peppered their coverage. Nothing concrete. Yet. Then came the interview. The CEO went on national television to address the unfounded rumors. His performance was rehearsed, mechanical, but there was something off. He smiled too often, blinked too little. When asked about internal audits, he deflected. When pressed, he scoffed. And then he said it. We've always maintained transparency. If there were issues, our people would have raised them internally, not in anonymous gossip posts. The forums lit up. Analysts replayed the clip in slow motion, breaking down his body language. Behavioral experts weighed in. His smirk became a meme. His denial, a punchline. I didn't cheer. I didn't scream. I just watched. Later that night, I stood outside my apartment, staring at the skyline. My phone buzzed. It was Lily. A voice note. "Hey, Daddy, we made paper masks in class. I made one of a lion and told everyone my dad's the real lion because he fights invisible monsters." I listened to that voice note again and again. I didn't reply right away. I just stared at the stars and whispered, "I'm trying, baby. I'm really trying." The headlines came like aftershocks. Billion-dollar deal on the brink. Anonymous whistleblower unravels M&A giant. Audit anomalies trigger global scrutiny. My alias was never mentioned, but the implications were clear. Somewhere out there, someone with access had sounded the alarm, and the world was listening. The media swarmed. Financial pundits speculated. Stockholders panicked. The company issued sterile press releases, empty denials coated in corporate polish. But the damage had already begun. The merger was on life support. Then came the unexpected crack in the glass. At a press briefing streamed live, a member of the board of directors stepped forward. Margaret Wells, head of ethics and compliance. She looked visibly shaken, her voice clipped but unwavering. "For years," she said, "internal concerns were raised and ignored. I now believe the CEO knowingly suppressed reports and redirected responsibility to loyal employees who asked too many questions. The room exploded. Questions flew. The moderator tried to cut her off, but Margaret kept speaking. "He didn't act alone," she said. "This was systemic." I recognized her instantly, though I hadn't seen her in years. Margaret Wells was born Margaret Carter, my sister. She'd taken our father's surname after marrying, distancing herself from the family name. We hadn't spoken since she left the company. I always thought she'd walked away. But now I understood. She had been silenced too. I watched the replay a dozen times, paused when her hand trembled, rewound when she glared at the CEO with something between fury and pity. That night, I walked past Lily's school gym. They had a game. She was out there on the court, ponytail swinging, chasing a ball with that reckless joy kids still believe will fix everything. I didn't go in. I just stood by the fence, half in shadow, watching her for a few minutes. She didn't see me. Maybe that was better. Maybe heroes didn't belong in the bleachers when they were still fighting dragons. Can justice really mend what betrayal has broken inside a family? The following morning, I received an encrypted message from a private address. It was short, blunt. "Your analysis aligns with our early suspicions. We'd like your insights, off the record." The sender was a lead investigator from the Financial Accountability Bureau, a task force working quietly on white-collar crime. I didn't hesitate. I wrote back one word: yes. Within hours, I was pulled into a secure digital briefing. Cameras off, voices modulated. I was introduced as Subject X. They asked questions. I gave data, patterns, context, logic. Then they asked for my name. I declined. The room fell silent. Then came agreement. I would serve as a confidential advisor, not a witness, for now. 3 days later, a message from an old colleague pinged into a dummy inbox I barely checked anymore. "They know it's you. Be careful." No greeting, no signature. But I knew who it was: Kevin. We had once eaten lunch together every Wednesday for 5 years. Then he vanished after I was fired. No goodbye, just silence. Until now. I didn't panic. I expected this moment. Still, it hit me in the chest like a slow, steady fist. I started scrubbing again, search histories, logins, IP traces. But something felt off. I pulled up metadata from one of my own encrypted uploads. There it was, a timestamp that didn't match, a routing path that pinged through an unexpected location. Our old office building. They hadn't just found me. Someone had helped them. Someone had made me visible. I sat in my parked car for an hour in the rain, not driving, not thinking, just listening to the patter against the windshield and the voicemail I kept saved. Lily's voice, soft and innocent. "Hi, Daddy. I made a painting for you. It's you holding a sword and a shield. Mommy said you're fighting for something important. Are you almost done?" I closed my eyes. I whispered, "Not yet, baby." Outside, the city roared. Inside, I was a storm barely held together by a promise I hadn't even spoken aloud. The hearing was held in a high-rise downtown building that smelled like stale coffee and burnt toner. I wore a suit that hadn't fit quite right since before the divorce papers. No legal team, no PR handler. Just me, a flash drive, and the feeling that if I blinked too long, I'd disappear into the floor. When they called my name, I walked to the stand, not as a whistleblower, not as a victim, but as a man who had simply refused to lie. The first few questions were formal, dry. Had I worked for the company? What was my role? Had I accessed internal files after termination? Then came the curveball. A lawyer representing the corporation stood, holding up a printed email. "This," he said, "is a message from your personal account, shared in a private forum containing proprietary financial models. Can you explain the breach of confidentiality?" They expected me to flinch, to stammer, but I had anticipated this. I looked directly at the panel. Those models were scrubbed of all identifiers. What they didn't scrub was the math, the anomalies, the impossible numbers. A silence settled. Then one of the senators leaned forward. "So, you admit it was you?" I nodded. "Yes. I released the data because internal channels failed. Because what I uncovered isn't just about my former employer, it's about the machinery behind it." He frowned. "Explain." I reached into my folder, pulled out a chart I'd printed the night before. A simple diagram. Arrows, entities, flow. "This," I said, pointing, "is not a company problem. It's a system. The holding firms that funded the merger, shells, controlled by a foreign investment group with a track record of regulatory gray zones. My company was a funnel, one of many." There was a shift in the room. The attorney from the corporation stood again, clearly rattled. "That's speculative." "Then verify it," I interrupted. "The payments were routed through 5 countries in 3 days. I have timestamps, account metadata. I didn't make it up. I just stopped pretending not to see it." A low murmur rippled across the room. The moderator called for a 5-minute recess. I stepped outside, hands shaking more than I'd admit. I pulled out my phone and dialed. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Mom," I whispered. "Ethan, I'm still here." There was a pause. Then she said, "I know." Back inside, the tone had changed. Less antagonism, more attention. The rest of the session passed in a blur of questions and half-sketched answers. I didn't have every piece, but I had enough. Enough to force the room to stop spinning and look down at the cracks in the floor. When you're backed against the wall, do you retreat or push forward? The answer, for me, had already been made. After the hearing, I stepped out into the cold afternoon light, expecting relief. Instead, I found waiting silence. No applause, no cameras, just a city moving on, unaware a man had just thrown a grenade into its polished boardrooms. The next morning, my inbox was flooded. Law firms, advocacy groups, financial watchdogs, even 2 VC firms offering jobs with high pay and clean reputations. I ignored them all. Then came the message that made my stomach twist. No sender, just a subject line. "You're not the first. One of them was found dead in 2018. Don't make the same mistake." I closed my laptop, took a long breath. Fear crept in like a shadow, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Instead, I dug deeper. A week later, I stood before my father's grave, the earth still soft around the edges. He had worked in the system too once. Never spoke of it. Retired early, got sick fast. "I have done what you never dared to, Father," I whispered. And for the first time, it didn't feel like I was breaking a promise. It felt like I was finishing something he never could. The final twist wasn't mine alone. I learned there was a network, small, scattered, determined. Former employees, journalists, compliance officers, all of them had been bruised by the same machine, and they'd been watching. They weren't heroes. They were tired people who'd simply decided not to stay silent anymore. I wasn't leading a charge. I was joining one. The first time I stood behind a podium after the hearings, the room was smaller than I'd imagined. Folded chairs, filtered coffee, a banner with peeling vinyl that read, "Corporate Ethics, rebuilding trust in broken systems. No cameras. Just a few dozen people who wanted to believe the world could be better. I told them the story. Not just the facts, but the silences between them. The late nights. The cracked voice messages. The way a grown man could still be afraid of becoming invisible. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. When I finished, no one clapped right away. It was better than applause. They just sat still, thinking. That weekend, my mother visited from Michigan. Lily was home from school, and for the first time in years, we all had breakfast together. My daughter insisted on making pancakes. My mom criticized her technique. I watched them argue over chocolate chips versus blueberries like it was the most beautiful debate in the world. Afterwards, Lily curled into my side and asked, "Are you done being a hero now?" I hesitated. "I don't think I was ever a hero." She frowned. "But you helped people, right?" I smiled. "I did." "Are you still helping?" The question lingered longer than I expected. Later that day, I got a call from a startup based out of Seattle. Small, new, idealistic. They were building financial tech tools and wanted someone to design their ethics framework from scratch. No flash, no games. They offered me a title, Chief Integrity Officer. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. That night, Lily slipped into my office while I was sorting through old notes. "Are you going to save people again?" she asked, quieter this time. I crouched beside her. "No, sweetheart. I'm going to teach people how not to need saving." The next month, with the help of 3 other former whistleblowers, I launched Echo. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have corporate backers. Just a website, a secured line, and a promise. If you speak up, you won't be alone. Echo wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. Not entirely. It was about insulation, giving people like me what I never had, a net to land on when the world gave way. In its first year, Echo helped 18 employees in 4 countries receive legal protection. Some cases were quiet, some loud, all mattered. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived, handwritten, sloppy print, no return address. "Dear Ethan, I read about you. I followed everything. For months, I was scared to speak up. My boss told me no one would believe me, but I did it. I showed them the documents. They listened. I kept my job. He lost his. Thank you. You didn't save me, but you made me think I could save myself." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just sat at my desk, stared at the letter, and nodded. That night, I reopened an old document on my computer, a draft I'd abandoned months ago. The cursor blinked, expectant. I took a breath and typed the first line. I didn't set out to destroy a billion-dollar empire. I just refused to lie.